Yes, today's presentation is about fast and efficient oil analysis report reading techniques, or how I like to say it, how to read a report in 2 minutes or less. So hopefully in the next 20 minutes, I'll show you how to do that. But what I'd like to start with is a question that I think bears answering, and that is ultimately, who is responsible for reading and interpreting an oil analysis report? And it really can fall to two different groups of people. And the number one answer, of course, a lot of people think it should be the labs. And I always hesitate on that one because I think the labs have a certain amount of expertise, and it might not be enough to get you as much out of the report as you could. So what I like to, kind of point out about the lab is they have a good idea about the limitations of the test itself, how much bias may be in the results, and what looks right. So that's kind of as far as they can take that aspect of it. They're also pretty good about knowing common metallurgies in terms of where metals are coming from, which type of components, or at least the likeliest answer. They're also very good with trending. They have a good idea what looks normal versus what doesn't look normal. But that's as far as they take it. And why I stress and why I created this presentation is so that the end user would take on a greater role reading these reports. And it's because this is what I perceive as the big difference. The end user knows most of what I just covered, but they also can add in things like where and how was the sample pulled. When the lab gets a sample result with a really high particle count, all of a sudden, they just have to report it as a high particle count and give a few suggestions as to why that might be. But the end user might know, maybe you sent out a new person to take that sample, maybe it wasn't flushed very well. There could be other reasons to explain anomalous results, and you don't necessarily take the same corrective actions. On top of that, the end user always knows how the equipment is configured in terms of what options do they have as remedies based on oil analysis results. Like, can you add filtration to this? And does it have an existing system? Can you kidney loop, things like this that you can do. A lab doesn't know if that's even possible unless you've told them somehow. So when they make a recommendation to filter an oil, they don't even know if it's necessarily an easy task for you to be able to do that. End users, like I said, of course, they would. End users should know too the operating conditions, right? They might expect a sample to come back with high water content or some contamination to it just because of the environment that it's working in. And again, they may know things that are going on within the equipment or within the operation of the equipment to guide why the result has gone in the direction it has. And the last thing I'll point out is that they also know if they've done anything to it. Right? When an oil analysis lab sees the result get significantly better than a previous result, we're left with basically an assumption the oil has been changed. But you might know that you've added in filtration or some other mediation technology, and you've made it better somehow. So I think hopefully by showing you this, you understand why should the end user be the one to read and interpret the report and not just count on the lab to do a really good job with the interpretation. It's because there's all these factors that the lab doesn't necessarily know or have access to that same information to make the same judgment. But let me show you the example we're going to go through, and we'll go through it in greater detail, but I just want to show it to you quickly. So this is a report. It's from a bearing. If your eyes go over to the report, I'll use my mouse here so you can see what I'm seeing. Most eyes go directly to this section here where you see there's alarmed wear metals. So you start thinking about this and you start making your own interpretations. Why are the wear metals high on the bearing? If I go to the next part of the report, again, your eyes come over here to there's a high particle count, there's a high water content, and you start to, again, piece together some sort of action plan or some thoughts behind this report. And if you go to the last page of the report, there's an analytical ferrography that was done on this one, and it shows a whole bunch of stuff happening in here. And again, you quickly peruse this, and all the red is very alarming, and you start, coming up with some answers in your head as to what's going on. And as I quickly showed that to you, I want to see if you made any of the common mistakes. And there's three that I think are made very, very commonly. So the first one is, as you read a report, when you go down the report, do you interpret as you go? Did you read high iron and start thinking of sources of iron? Did you see high lead, start thinking of how the lead would interact with the iron? That's what I call interpreting on the fly, and that's a waste of time. That gets you thinking about things you don't necessarily need to think about until you see the whole picture. Another common mistake is, are you focused on the symptoms? Are you focused on things like wear metals? Because wear is a symptom. Something is making it wear. Is it a misalignment? Is it an imbalance? Something has caused it to wear. So why are we focused on the wear? So again, that's a very common mistake, that people are just looking at that and, making all their judgment based on the symptoms, not necessarily looking for what on the report tells me the true cause of all that wear. And it's probably related to that high water content or the particle count, which could be something, as I'm showing here on screen, could be the breather. The last common mistake that I see is that people don't tend to look at a report at all unless it's alarmed. If the report comes back normal, they tend to just file it away and leave it alone. And even at that, when it comes back alarmed, like I said, most people focus on only the alarms and start questioning what that is. And my analogy is, it's like using your smoke detector to tell you when your muffins are done, right? It's a bit too late once the alarms are going off. You need to use this tool, and I call it a tool, as not a reactive tool in terms of waiting for the alarm to go off. You need to use it as a predictive tool, as in anticipating when it will go into alarm. So now I'd like to show you what are the steps to quickly and efficiently read any oil analysis report from any lab, any supplier, doesn't matter what format it's in. This is the technique. Why I'm showing you this is, the expression about tools, that it doesn't matter how many of these tools you have, it doesn't matter how many reports you get, they're kind of useless if you don't know how to use them properly. So let's learn how to use them properly. So the quick steps, and they're simple. And of course, I'm always going for simple, because the simpler it is, the easier it is for somebody to do it, to learn it, and to implement it. And I try and keep this as simple as possible. So step one, read the whole report. Don't just read the alarm stuff. Don't just focus on things that are highlighted or identified by the lab. Take in all the information. When you're doing this, what you're trying to do is decide what is a cause versus what is an effect. And you're not going to take it any further than that. You're not discussing in your mind, did this cause that? Is that an effect of this? Don't worry about that. When you're assigning these things causes and effect, you will find that by the time you get to the end of the report, all of the causes will group together in one or two groups, no matter how bad the report is. You're allowed to change your answers as you go along, because sometimes you might find something later in the report that tells you that what you earlier thought was a cause may be an effect of a different cause. So always keep an open mind as you go through the report, but try and keep track as you do it. And like I said, you'll see how it all pans out. The last thing, going a bit too fast. The last thing though is, once you reach the end of the report and you see all the causes grouped together, now formulate an action plan to say, how do I either confirm that's the problem, eliminate a possibility, or sometimes you in fact know directly how to fix the problem. And essentially I'm talking about what work order would get created from this report. The quick thing I'll mention though is oil changes are seldom the answer. Yes, it makes the next report look better, but it didn't really fix any of the mechanical issues. So you get a report with a high particle count or a high wear amount and you change the oil, yes, the next report probably comes back looking better. But you know what? It's just going to happen again and again and again. So let's go back to the original report, and we'll go through it a bit more slowly. I've got 10 minutes to do this. So here's how to do it in 2 minutes or less. It's going to take us a little bit longer because I'll be explaining as I go. But when I say read the whole report, I do mean start, and I'll get my mouse up here, start at the top of the report. What is this? It's an anti-friction bearing. So in your mind, you got to picture what that is. Oil type AW46. It's an anti-wear oil. It means it's got zinc and phosphorus in all likelihood. I should expect to see that. Probably has some calcium too. That's pretty common with AW formulations. It's a 46. It has a 46 centistoke viscosity. Again, I'm anticipating some of what I will see on the report based on the information. Now it gives me, the make and model of the bearing here. It tells me the sump size isn't known, so I don't know if this is a little tiny 1 gallon sump or if it's a bigger bearing with maybe several gallons of oil. I see information regarding the sample. Just gives me an idea. When was the sample taken? Your own name and address. Seriously, how long does it take to confirm this is you? This is your report. Again, just helps you remember and familiarize yourself with exactly which component we're looking at. When you come down to a part of the report, you're always going to see what the lab had to say. So in this case, the lab has identified the problems and has over here placed some comments regarding those problems. Now, like I said, the lab's interpretation is based off a limited amount of information. So it's not that it's going to be wrong, but it's not necessarily going to be the best answer. It's a good guess as to some of the things that are happening. So I encourage you to read those comments, and you don't have to agree with them 100%, but at least you can see somebody else's take on the oil analysis report. Now, once we get down to the data section, this is where people tend to get a little bit lost. So let me just point out a couple of things here. First and foremost, there is generally a column or a line on everyone's reports that says what the new oil should look like. So that is your baseline comparison, best case scenario. What did the oil look like before it went into the machine? Right beside or below it is going to be the most current sample. And then as you move across the report, you're going to see older and older results. So when you trend on a report, you either read it from right to left, or if people orient the reports the other way, you read them from the bottom to the top. But we're going to be looking at the most current sample, of course, and that's the one right next to the baseline information, and that's going to be helpful for comparison. Now, when I do say read the whole report, I do mean the whole report, and that is don't immediately jump down here to where the numbers are located, read across some of the other information, right? I've got dates sampled up here. I can see the interval between the first and second sample was 2 weeks, then 4 weeks, and then 4 weeks again, right? Gives me an idea of the trend I should see. I can see the hours on this. First sample was at hour 0. What does that tell me? It was a brand new component. It had brand new oil in it, which seems obvious, of course. But as you move along, you can see that the machine has built up hours, which of course is what you would expect, but so has the oil. What that tells me is the oil's never been changed. So again, I have an idea what the trends are going to look like before I even looked at the data. They should all be in one continuous direction. No back and forth, no sawtoothing, or whatever you want to call it. So when I say read the whole report, I mean reading everything, just to make sure you're capturing as much information as possible. Now, as you continue down the report, you have to then find stuff that seems not normal to you. Anything that seems to be deviating from trend, anything that seems to be far away from the new oil values. So as we go through this report, I'll show you what I mean by that and how you kind of keep a tally, and we'll get to the end of the report here, hopefully in just a couple of minutes. So what's the first thing on the report that you see that doesn't look right? It's probably that iron result. So is iron a cause or an effect? Well, easy answer is almost all wear is simply an effect of something else happening. So let's call that one an effect. Okay, next thing on the report that we see that we don't like, probably that lead value. Now, is lead a cause or effect? Well, if iron was an effect, so is going to be lead. Right? We keep reading down the report, and what some people might notice is that things like the calcium don't match with the new oil value. Now, does this seem to be a problem? Well, here's the funny thing. We have a sample all the way over here at hour 0, and we see the trend is fairly flat. What that probably tells me is this piece of equipment is not necessarily filled with Conoco AW46. That may be what the end user intends on putting there, but it's the difference between factory fill and shop fill. Maybe whoever they bought the machine from pre-lubed it with a different lubricant that is an AW46, it just doesn't happen to be the same brand. So I'm not going to call that one a cause or effect because I don't think it's necessarily a problem. It has a flat trend. I could be looking at phosphorus and come up with the same conclusion, and I could also look at zinc and come up with the same solution. So on this first half of the report, I've identified iron and lead as effects. I haven't found a single cause yet. So keep going down the report and keep looking for something. Just, again, be methodical. And the next thing I see that I don't think matches trend or doesn't match new oil values very closely, silicon. So silicon a cause or effect? Well, the easiest way to answer that question is to ask yourself, would silicon particles in the oil cause iron and lead to appear? Or could iron and lead make silicon appear? And hopefully you realize it's the first answer. It's probably an abrasive contaminant. So silicon, let's call that one a cause. Now, as we keep going, you might notice another field as we go down into the FTIR results is called other fluid. And again, it doesn't match the new oil value, but again, the trend is flat from the very first sample. This is a parameter measured by infrared that isn't measuring how much other fluid is there. It's measuring the value of a wavelength of infrared. And if the value changes significantly, would indicate other fluid being present, not, again, how much, just a wavelength measurement. So the fact that it's smooth and stable as a trend tells me, no, we've had the same fluid there the whole time. That's not of concern. Okay, we keep going down the report, and next thing that stands out is there's a particle count that's extraordinarily high. Now, this is a tricky question. Is the particle count high because it's a cause and maybe it's creating all the iron and lead? Or is the particle count high because it is the iron and lead? So let's throw a question mark on that one and leave it for now, because we don't have enough information to properly say which side it should be on, cause or effect. Okay, keep going down the report, and the only other thing on this page of the report that seems abnormal is the water content. Now, is water a cause or an effect? Well, hopefully you can quickly agree water would be a cause. Water could make a lot of things happen. So let's throw water content down under causes. Now, the last page of the report is an analytical ferrography, and it's got a whole bunch of categories here, mostly of wear and contamination is what ferrography focuses on. So it should be easy to slot these ones into obvious cause or effects. So as you go down these, first one comes up, sliding wear, cause or effect. Something's making it wear, so it's an effect. Okay, next one, the first one was rubbing wear, second one sliding wear. Is it a cause or effect? Yeah, it's also an effect. So yes, we identify it, but we put it over here as an effect. Keep going down the list. You're going to see other things on here. So we've got corrosion, probably caused by the water. It's just an effect. So we'll throw it under the effect column. We go to the next one, dark metallic oxides. That's due to high pressure contact wear. So these are parts that have welded together and shorn off particles that have annealed. Yeah, something's making that happen, right? Lack of lubrication, probably, maybe related to the water displacing the lubricant. So we'll throw it under effects. Red oxides is the next one you'd notice. Fancy way of saying rust. Definitely an effect, right? Probably caused by the water. So throw it under the effect column. Getting down near the end here, though, we now see that there is dust and dirt been identified. Well, that's not an effect. Something didn't make that appear because of the wear. It got in there and probably caused a bunch of this wear. So it is a cause. So we're going to put it under causes. But notice that we still have question mark beside particle count, right? We put it in both sides, don't know which one it belongs in. So now that we go back to the report, we revisit particle count, knowing that we've got high silicon, knowing that we've got high dust and dirt, knowing we've got a whole bunch of wear. Do we think the particle count is a cause, or do we simply think it's an effect? Well, it probably seems pretty reasonable to say it's a cause. It's probably related to that silicon and that dust dirt. So my point is, by reading the report this way, assigning it a cause or effect, moving it from one side to the other, when we get to the end, we look at it this way. We don't worry about the effects. We worry about the causes. What made all those other things appear were these things on the left side. Then we just need to group them. Do we think that silicon, dust, dirt, and particle count all are related to each other? Seems pretty reasonable. Do we think the water is also related to them? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. So when we group them, and this is what I was hinting at, when you group them, you end up with only one or two groups. So we've got these two groups here. We know what's causing it. So now we just have to figure out what would we do next. And just going back to the report as a reminder, this is a bearing. It's a bearing that somehow has high silicon, high dust dirt, high particle count. We assume those three are all interrelated, but also has high water content. So what should we do, right? We're not just going to change the oil. That would be, again, removing the evidence. But what we probably would do is something simple like go inspect the breathers. Right? It probably has a breather on it that maybe could use some upgrading from one type to another, right? Or maybe it already has a slightly improved breather, needs to go to even better breather. Maybe it's something as simple as the breather is damaged. It's not on tight, it's not functioning the way it should. But the point of being efficient with reading a report is, one, to be able to arrive at a reasonable conclusion of what to do next and do something that's meaningful, not just, again, erasing all the evidence by changing the oil. But the other thing is, if you're efficient at this, you'll take the time to read every report. So just returning to the first page of the report here to end our presentation, if I quickly assign these numbers, so you know what I'm talking about, because that was the first sample, number 1. And then, like I said, if you move to the left, that's the second, the third, and the fourth. My point is this. If you can quickly and efficiently read every report, which report of these 4 would you have actually caught the problem on? I mean, obviously the fourth one that we just looked at, we definitely caught the problem now. But if you look at it, and hopefully you see what I'm seeing, is that we would have noticed the trend on iron and lead on that third sample. And if I was to show you again the second page, you'd see the water content had increased about 8-fold between the second and third sample. The particle count had also increased slightly, right? We would have made this same judgment of go inspect the breather or go upgrade the breather on the third sample long before all this wear occurred. And that's one of the biggest things about oil analysis. It's meant to be a predictive tool, but the way a lot of people use it, it's more of a reactive tool. So the third sample is the one we could have caught the problem on, could have fixed this. So just to summarize what we said, I'm trying to simplify the way we interpret a report to make you fast and efficient at doing this. Right? It helps you identify the root cause and not focus on all the effects. Another big thing is it makes oil analysis truly predictive, not reactive. If we keep going down the line, it gives you the time to read every report and get as much information as you can. It helps you take your program to a higher level, which of course, what everyone's looking at, increases your return on investment. People want to see that all the time. So with that, I've reached the end. I'll turn it over to any questions that Greg has received in the time, but I thank you all for listening, and hopefully that wasn't too rapid fire and fast for you. So thank you.